I got a fax. That's how old the story is. It was a fax from Tony King who said, "Would you be interested in touring with the Rolling Stones?"
Would you be interested in touring with the Rolling Stones?
Yeah, it's a hell of a question. I was thinking, what? That's just an oxymoron. I mean, what sort of? There is only one answer, and the fact they were paying me, bloody hell.
Here at the Australian Music Vault, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome renowned and celebrated rock photographer, Tony Mott. Hi, Tony.
Good afternoon.
I can't ever remember a big day out without you there with your trusty camera in hand.
That's because there wasn't one.
And cheeky grin.
Yeah, no, the cheeky grin disappeared every now and again. But I started on the big day out by accident. I knew Ken West in Sydney. He was managing Kate Soprano and Ed Cooper, not at the same time. And he hung around the Sydney Trade Union Club where bands played. And I remember having a discussion about festivals and how I'd just come back from Reading. And from a photographer's point of view, it was fantastic. You're shooting in daylight. And I said, for a country that's got such shitty weather, they've got these amazing festivals, Glastonbury and Reading. And there's Australia with Narara tried, Sunbury tried, but they just came and went. And he agreed. And he said, I'm going to try and do a festival. But he said, I'm not going mainstream. And he did what became the big day out. And of course, I jumped on board immediately and I became the official photographer on the first year and then travelled. I did all 24 years. I never missed a big day out. Sometimes I wasn't actually there, but I was.
Out of those 24 years, do they mould into one? Do they just meld and mesh?
There's a definite blending. Somewhere, the first few years were very memorable and you remembered them completely. But then eventually, particularly when the Foo Fighters and Blink-182 started coming back and Prodigy went from the boiler room onto the main stage, they did blend a little bit. And strangely, when I get asked about the big day out, I have no problem naming the best year, and that was the second year, the first travelling one. Mainly because it was new and no one had done a travelling festival in Australia before. There was no it's the only big day out that didn't have a headliner.
All the bands took it in turns, didn't they?
It was Sonic Youth, Iggy Pop, and
Beast of Burden.
Nick Cave.
Nick Cave, sorry. And
they took it in turns, and they nearly always finished with a jam doing "I Want to Be Your Dog," Iggy Pop, and there was no egos. Everyone was. There were genuine admiration and respect, and it was just a buzz. It was such a great festival. Everywhere we went, we had a ball. It was fantastic. Iggy Pop had a lot to do with that because every band on the bill, the Ramones were on the bill as well. Everybody on that bill respected Iggy Pop. He was like the god. And I do remember that Ken West, or maybe even Vivian Lee, said that having Iggy Pop accepting economy tickets meant that no one else could ask for a first-class ticket because no one was going to beat Iggy. But it was such a great festival then. It always remained great, but in those early days, it was unbelievably great because Ken and Viv were listening to music coming. By the time we turned the century and it's 2000, they started getting established headliners to sell tickets. But prior to that, when the Smashing Pumpkins, Soundgarden and Bjork played the big day out the first time, they'd never been on the charts. They then ended up on mainstream charts, but they were booking bands before they made it.
What do you think the big day out did for Australian music?
Well, the great thing was it wasn't just the international bands. There was always, ultimately, there'd be 50 bands, Aussie bands, playing as support, but there'd also be about 6 or 7 Australian bands travelling, doing every gig. And so there was, as promoters, they were respecting Australia on a level with international bands, whereas prior to that, Australian bands were always the support band. But, Beast of Bourbon played on the main stage. And I remember Henry Rollins watching Beast of Bourbon and just going, wow. I mean, he got converted and just went, they're a fantastic band. So it produced a generation of Australian bands that after the big day out was finished at the end of January, that the rest of the year, those bands were touring and they'd just gone from being X amount to they could fill in big rooms. So it was very encouraging for Australian bands. It was fantastic.
The big day out's a long way from Sheffield, where you were born, Tony.
It certainly is, yes. A hell of a long way. It's a long way from Sheffield to Sydney.
What initially brought you to Sydney after you graduated from Sheffield Polytechnic as a French chef?
So I was a French chef by trade, which is a great trade to have because you can work anywhere in the world. And I don't know what made me. I've got a theory that I've always been. I've been to over 100 countries, so I'm a traveller. And I was a train spotter and not an embarrassed one. I enjoyed train spotting in the 60s.
What do you like about trains?
Well, it was in the era, because I'm very old, it was in the era of steam engines, and steam engines were just fantastic. They were basically an engine, and all the mechanics were on the outside, whereas modern trains, you can't see the engines, it's just a glorified bus. So I used to go to my local railway station and watch the trains go by, and at either end of my local railway station was tunnel. One tunnel went to Manchester and one tunnel went to London. And I was always fascinated what was the end of the tunnel. And very early on, when I was only a teenager, like when I was 11 or 12, I was doing the length and breadth of Britain on trains. And then I'd seen all of Britain, so I suppose it was inevitable. I was working in Guildford in the south of England, and a guy there said, "Oh, I'm off to Australia." And in the 1970s, there's no such thing as backpackers. You either emigrated to Australia or you've never been there. And he said, you should just come out and look at it. And I literally got on a plane to Australia, unbelievably ignorant Pom. No idea about Australia. The Opera House had been open for about a year. I wasn't aware where it was. I knew it was in Australia. There was loads of publicity, but I didn't know it was in Sydney. When I got off the plane and I drove to Mona Vale, a beach suburb north of Sydney, I saw the Opera House. That was the first gobsmacking thing. I went, God, that's pretty impressive. But within 6 months, this is 1976, within 6 months, I was very aware that Australia had an amazing live music scene. I was already obsessed with music anyway. So I started getting to watch Australian bands, and then I did a lot of traveling. I worked on a cruise ship, did a lot of traveling, and I ended up back in Thatcher's England, which is not funny after you've been somewhere else. And I just realised, I don't want to live here. This place is a shithole. And me and my friend went to London for 2 days, and I applied to emigrate to Australia, New Zealand, Argentina, Brazil, Canada, and the US. And I got accepted in Canada, and I nearly went to Canada, but the Australian visa came through at the same time, and I already knew Sydney, so I came back to Sydney.
Goodness me.
So that's how I ended up in
That could
Australia.
have been a sliding doors moment, you know.
Totally sliding doors moment. I mean, strangely, I'd already been to Vancouver, so I liked Vancouver, but I actually got a job in Toronto. And I think the weather was probably the big thing. I went, oh, do I really want to be in the snow? I've grown up in it. And I did love Sydney, and I did love Australia in general. And I'd already experienced it, so I came to Australia. And again, I got lucky that Australia in the early 80s had just the most amazing live music scene. I mean, we're talking 7 nights a week in your suburb. You didn't have to leave your suburb. I often quote Robert Smith and The Cure came in 81, and they played Sydney for 3 months and never played the same suburb twice.
Is that right?
That's how good the live music scene was. It was just phenomenal. And of course, Melbourne had probably a better live music scene than Sydney did. So when I first came to Melbourne and saw the Melbourne music scene, very similar to the Sydney scene, but more encourageable, just bigger and more intense. There was a saying in the early 80s that all the best bands came from Melbourne, but they had to go to Sydney to get a record deal. Mushroom
true,
changed that, but that used to be. But there was always a buzz about when Melbourne bands were just. I remember when Big Pig first came to Sydney, and there was just everybody knew about it. They weren't on the television, they weren't on the radio, but everybody who was into music knew this band, and everyone went to the Sydney Trade Union Club to see what was quite a bizarre act. But they were like, every time a band came from Melbourne, everyone checked them out, and it was just a thriving music scene, which obviously I got lucky as when I started doing photography. That was the scene I was jumping into. It was fantastic.
Well, it was thanks to the thriving Sydney music scene that you got lucky in photography. It was down to a band called the Divinyls.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
and they had a residency, a Monday night residency, didn't they?
That's right. There was lots of venues that did residencies, which basically the same band every Monday night for 6 months. The best one was the Civic Hotel. And I remember they had Midnight Oil, Hoodoo Gurus, Mental as Anything, and I can't remember every week for about 6 months. They weren't name bands. They were just starting bubbling up. And I went to the Piccadilly Hotel in King's Cross, and the Monday night band was the Divinyls. Never heard of them. I wandered in. And it didn't take long for your eyes to be transfixed by this woman on stage, Chrissy Ampler, who was mesmerising, this screaming banshee who didn't just sit still, just constantly abusing the audience, abusing the band, abusing herself. And you just, and in that time, in those months, I just looked, and because of my interest in photography, I thought, that's got to be difficult to photograph. That's going to be really difficult.
Where did this interest come from in photography? Was it from the travelling that you'd done prior?
From travelling. I went to India and Nepal about 2 years before I saw the Divinyls. I was in Nepal, and I loved Nepal and India. And a girl that I was travelling with shot black and white portraits. So she developed her own black and white. and I was obsessed with it. And I more or less forced her to teach me how to do black and white processing, very simple black and white processing. So I had a minor level of skill of doing black and white portrait photography from traveling. Converting that to rock and roll wasn't so easy because, when you're traveling, the light's not going on and off and the subject's not going all over the place. So my first 4 months were quite crap. I didn't get anything back. And I'd go home and develop the film, hang them in my bathtub, look at them, and there'd be nothing. And slowly but surely, mainly through trial and error, I worked out how to do a live photo. And by complete coincidence, it was the end of their residency when their manager approached me and said, I'd like to look. He'd seen me at the front. And he said, I'd like to look at the photographs. I ignored him for a full week thinking, I don't need him to see my photographs. I was, I think, embarrassed. And then he harassed me a bit more, and I gave him a contact sheet, and he bought one, which became the first photo I ever sold, and it became a tour poster. And he paid me the $20 and put my name on the door. And when he put the name on the door, I was so ignorant. I went, oh, that's great. They put my name in the door. And then he caught me paying to get in about 2 weeks later. And he said, but your name's on the door. And I sort of went proudly, yeah, I know. Thinking there was some rehearsal room where they scribbled people's names to help them. I had no idea that I wasn't paying to get in more. But I do remember the sensation of, I don't have to pay anymore to see this band. I thought, wait, this is brilliant. And that was the start of it, really. And then it just snowballed. I just kept doing it, shooting every band. And it was the birth of street press in Australia. Beat and Impress in Melbourne, On the Street was in Sydney. And I literally walked into the offices and just offered my services. Money was never a motivation. I just wanted to photograph bands. And I was going out, I was working as a chef till 10 at night and then going out 7 nights a week, photographing whoever. I used to keep a record. I've got a book with all the records of everyone I was shooting. And when I look back on it, I shot Men at Work on a Monday night at Mansell with no memory of it. It was just a band that had come up from Melbourne. They hadn't got a record deal, but that's what was happening. A band like Men at Work would play the Mansell Room. The Mansell Room held 150 people max. It's a shithole, but it was a shithole. I went 7 nights a week. So it was just great. I got unbelievably lucky that's the timing of everything. And with Australia that particular time, without a doubt, the best live music scene in the world. And I'm qualified to say that because I'd lived in London. I'd spent time in New York and LA, and I was now in Sydney. And yeah, we knocked spots off it. It was just every suburb had a gig. It was great.
Well, it's working for Street Press that you finally work out how to shoot still bands as opposed to bands performing live on stage.
Absolutely. I'd probably been doing it about a year when eventually they said, oh, we need a portrait of a band, whatever, for an article we're about to do. And one of the first bands they gave me were the Triffids, they weren't huge, but they were in the inner city. There was a buzz about them, and I was quite thrilled. I knew who they were. I'd got their EP. I think there was an EP at the time, and they were rehearsing at a recording studio, a rehearsal space in Ultimo in Sydney, and I had no idea what I was doing. I got them, and I was working under the presumption that they would do something, and so basically there was these 5 people just next to a brick wall, and they're just hanging about, and I took a picture of them hanging about. And when I went back to the office, they said, were they really difficult? I went, well, they just didn't do anything. I went, well, did you get them to do anything? I went, no, I just took photos. And I learned a big lesson there that...
You didn't actually realise that you had to direct the artists and get them to do stuff, play up to the camera, look at the camera. You just expected to shoot them and they'd do something. I just presumed they were rock stars and they'd just pose and they'd do whatever you're supposed to do and I'd just take it. So I learned very quickly that I'm in charge and you've got to direct, which was a great learning curve. And obviously the editor was very kind because they hired me to do other things. I don't know if you remember the Joe Boxers. They were a Birmingham ska band. Yes, I remember.
I did them, actually the opposite of what I've just said because the Triffids just talking about. The Joe Boxers immediately posed and they would sort of make a human pyramid and I got a great shot. But I took that in and it became the front cover on the street and they go, oh, you've learnt really quickly. You've got them to do X, Y and Z. But the reality was the band actually did it. But I was aware all of a sudden that I got to direct. And of course that sort of thing is, the more you do, the better you get at it. And you learnt, and also because there's different personalities, there's certain people that you end up shooting that it's already there. They've got an image in mind. The examples of that are people like R.E.M. Michael Stipe is a photographer and he's very aware what's going to look good in the camera. And he's sort of going towards the camera. And the 3 guys are just in the back going, oh, can we go home now? But Michael Stipe and Chrissy Ampler, very aware of but there is plenty of bands that aren't comfortable in front of a Coldplay. I've done Coldplay even when they were a massive band and it was me that manipulated them into getting them in a certain pose to make it look like a bit of length and whatever. So yeah, it was a valuable lesson. But I was working. That's what was the beauty of street press. You were learning on lots of bands. One of the early bands was Wet Taxis, which had Lewis Tillett and Charlie Owen in the band and Penny Arginger in it, and they were a really great contrasting looking band. And they were a great subject matter to learn on because there was contrast in all their personalities. And I remember trying really hard to get great shots of them. And I realized that the effort I put in made a good shot. And if you just turn up, you're just going to get average. So it was a learning curve. And you've got to remember, money was no motivation for me. I was absolutely thrilled to be doing all this. And I reckon for the first 8 years of doing all that, that's exactly what I was doing. I was just having a ball photographing bands. And the fact I wasn't paying to see a gig anymore was, as far as I was concerned, my wage. But it just snowballed. And then finally, I got a phone call. I always remember it was a wet night in Redfern. I was at home, pre-mobile phones, and they came home to the answering machine. And I answered and said, "Hi, it's Tony King here. I'm Mick Jagger's personal manager. We're looking for someone to tour with Mick Jagger on the Australian tour. Please ring da-da-da-da-da." And I genuinely thought, it's one of my idiot friends up the Hopetown pub has played a prank on me and they left a call. And I ignored it for about 4 days. And I got very lucky because I happened to be home about 4 days later. Phone went and Tony King goes, "So you too cool to tour with Mick Jagger?" And I thought, fuck, it's Mick Jagger's manager. Bloody hell. And I scored the Mick Jagger solo tour, got on with Mick Jagger, had a really great time on the tour. And yet again, within 6 months of that, I got a fax. That's how old the story is. It was a fax from Tony King who said, "Would you be interested in touring with the Rolling Stones?"
Would you be interested in touring with the Rolling Stones?
Yeah, it's a hell of a question. I was thinking, what? That's just an oxymoron. I mean, what sort of? There is only one answer, and the fact they were paying me, bloody hell. And the really weird thing about that is it's a snowball effect. Once you do one, you get another. Within a year of that, I'd done MC Hammer, Fleetwood Mac. I did lots of big tours, and then I went back to I went to the US and I went to UK, did some festival photography, and I got very drunk in Paris for about a month. Had a really good time. And then I came back, and I remember being with Patty Moston at a press conference, and everyone's chatting there. And it was Fleetwood Mac. It was Fleetwood Mac, and Fleetwood Mac were looking for a tour photographer. And behind me, literally, I could hear Patty Moston going, "Oh yes, he's just come back from Paris and London. Oh yeah, you definitely should use the mobile." And I'm thinking, I wonder what they're talking about. Well, I didn't realise what she's talking about me, and she'd interpreted that my drinking session in Paris as if I was doing lots of really important
You're
very,
very busy and important.
I was just a very drunk man having a good time in Paris. But it was just that image that she said Paris, London, and I scored the Fleetwood Mac tour.
Tony, I've known you a long time. Have you ever tried to quantify what it is that people feel comfortable with to allow you into their private, a la Rolling Stones, Mick Jagger, that allow you to get up close and personal for so many years?
I think I have worked it out over the years. I'm not the best photographer. I'm very aware that I'm a good photographer, and on good days I can produce really good images. But there's a lot of photographers who are better than me. But with musicians, you're collaborating with them. And you've also got to have empathy with them, and you've got to listen to the music. There's a nameless photographer I'll name who's a way superior photographer than me, and he could never work out why he wasn't getting gigs. But he was very, very arrogant, and he was also used to working with models. And when you hire a model to do something, you say to a model, "I want pathos, I want this, do this," and you're dictating to them what to do because that's a model's job. You do that to a musician, they're gonna tell you to take a running jump. So I've always got on with the musicians. And also, particularly when you're a fly on the wall, like the Rolling Stones, which is a really good example, obviously the management and the Stones want lots of great photos. But when you walk into the room and the Stones are there, it's not... You can't go ballistic all the time. You've got to choose your moment. There's no point ever taking a photo for the sake of taking a photo. So if Mick and Keith are there and the light's wrong or whatever, there's just no point annoying them with click, click, click if there's going to be a result. So you just wait patiently. And if you're with them for long enough, you do become the proverbial fly on the wall. Eventually, you're more or less invisible. So you're just taking enough. You're getting enough for what they need, but at the same time, you're not irritating them. Plenty of musicians, if you're doing too much, you've got to pick your moments. You've got to read a room, basically. And I've always been quite good at that. And I've always got on with musicians. And I think that's quite important, that it's your personality of getting on with them is quite important. I often advise young people when they're doing photography, if you're, for instance, someone gets a gig, let's go and photograph Jane Gazzo. Never met Jane Gazzo in her life. You turn up, and and they say you've only got 45 minutes. And a lot of them panic, going, only 45 minutes. 45 minutes is plenty of time. But I guarantee the first 15 minutes is best spent saying, oh, hi, Jane, I'm Tony. So what I thought, and come out, when you're walking into the room to meet Jane, who you've never met before, come in with 4 ideas. So she has the right to go, oh, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not having it. Until you get one, and went, oh yeah, that's quite good. I quite like that. So you're coming in with more than one idea. Never go into a room with an idea, which you think's fantastic, but for whatever reason, that musician might go, I don't want to do that, and you can't then go, oh, that's really what I want to do. So you come in with lots of ideas, and when I say ideas, simple ideas, and they've got the right to reject them, so that eventually you're all on the same page, and then it becomes what I said before. It's a collaboration. So. I forgot what the hell the question was now because I've gone off in circles.
Why are bands endeared
alcohol.
to you?
I just drink with them.
Well, it's interesting. You said you like to read the room, and there was a case in point when the Rolling Stones had a special.
They did. That's reading
a special
the room.
Get out of jail free card for you.
Yeah. So when I was there was tricks, and the Rolling Stones have got all the tricks. So they always said, not so much live, but when you're in, they have to do certain functions. And they say, if they don't want any more photos taken, and I'm the only photographer in them, they'd always say, hey, Motty, you're looking a bit tired. And that was my cue for them to telling me to F off. And you leave the room. You're welcome to come back, but don't bring the camera back. And so then the room, they don't look like I say, oh, I can't have any more photos taken. The other one with the Stones, which was a great trick, is when you're on the crew, they say, for fuck's sake, don't ask them for autographs. They're just fed up with that. But at the same time, they put a box outside of everybody's dressing room, and you put your album there, put a Post-it note saying, to Motty, Mick Jagger. And I guarantee that within a week it gets signed, and you pick up in the box the next 2 days. But don't go, all crew are told, please don't ask them for their autograph. They just get sick of it. Great trick. Wow. Great trick. So,
Motty. In the 90s, with your street press photography and record company photography for stills and promo shoots, you became synonymous with the fisheye lens. Let's talk about the fisheye lens. It really is a product of the 90s. It deserves to stay there too.
It certainly does. It's not coming back. The fisheye lens for me happened. I was in New York. Sometimes when you're doing a photo session with a band, they're hungover, they don't want to really do it. And sometimes it can be a bit boring. It's not, and even doesn't matter how much manipulation they need. I was in New York, and I'm not quite sure how, but I was there used to be a camera shop called 40 Street Cameras, and it wasn't on 42nd Street, which was always weird. But anyway, it was the cheapest camera store in the world. Every photographer in the world knew about it. And they had a fisheye lens in it. I was like, oh, wow, that was it. And I put it on the camera, and I just went, oh, my God, wow, that's amazing. Look at it. First band was Die Pretty. They were in New York, and when I look back, because it's on strips of film, I look back, and there's like 80 frames, and the first 72 are fisheye, and then there's a couple more. So it would be fair to say, and it's been said by many bands, that I got infatuated. It was never glued to the camera, contrary to popular belief, but it did stay on the camera a lot. And I shot people like the Beastie, everybody. I shot everyone on fisheye. And of course, initially there was quite a reaction where people were, oh, wow, that's great, got front covers a little bit. But within a couple of years, people were going, yeah, can we do something else? But I couldn't.
What did Silverchair think of the fisheye lens?
Well, Silverchair, the band, loved it, but John Watson, the manager, did not. And he used to send me to Newcastle on a regular basis to shoot their publicity shots, which was 2 days because they were so big around the world, they needed lots. Anyway, I happened to go up there once, and I'd said to the band, oh, John's banned the fisheye, and they thought that was highly amusing. They said, let's do some fisheye and just send it and say, these are the only ones we've approved. John didn't find that amusing at all. Slowly but surely, I did get rid of the fisheye lens, and only very recently, I shot Krill C, who I shot a lot in the 90s. I did their album covers, I did lots of stuff with them. And they're one of the bands that went, and the first thing Tex said to me, not the bloody fisheye lens. And he wouldn't believe me. I said, I haven't even brought it. I haven't even got one anymore. And he was going, that's not true. He'll bring it out. But I didn't.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Tex Perkins, because there's a performer that you have had the pleasure of not only getting to know personally, but been there since the Beasts of Bourbon days.
And before. I did JFK and the Cuban Crisis. Oh, no, that wasn't him. What was he called?
Tex Deadly and the Dum-Dums.
Tex Deadly and the Dum-Dums. There was a point where Tex reckoned he was in 36 bands in a single year in Sydney. Some of them only played one gig. I remember doing Thug, all sorts of bands. Tex was fantastic. There's a man that's worthy of my camera. You never get a bad shot of Tex. He lends himself to the camera and he puts effort in. Even though he does it in a very nonchalant Tex sort of way, you're always getting great shots of Tex. One of my best sessions I ever did early on was I was doing the Beasts of Bourbon's Black Milk album cover, which I did shoot. And Tex had set up like an altar with a little bowl of black milk and a couple of little things. And I was in his he lived in a squat in Woolloomooloo. And I went there and he was more or less directing me. It was a very simple shoot. And I was shooting it. And as we were finishing up, the band turned up because they were having a band meeting. And as I turned around, the band were on a table, a long table, in a squat in Tex's place. And I just turned around and went, God, that looks great. And I literally turned one light round, turned around, and I did direct the band members just to go there. And that shoot was one of the most successful shoots because we ended up, it wasn't planned. We weren't going to do a shoot. So there's no makeup artist, there's nobody there, there's no stylist, no one from here, just me and the band. And we only spent about 2 hours, but the band got so much use out of it. I got front covers all over the place. And it was the gatefold of the Black Milk album cover. It was just unbelievably successful. And it was sort of a happy accident. But it was, by then I'd learnt what looks good on a band shoot. And I manipulated it, not manipulated, but moved the band around to make it look great. But I have done a lot of Tex Perkins shoots over the years. And it'd be fair to say I've never done a bad one. And that's not my skill so much as Tex is camera worthy. Tim Rogers would be another one. I've done lots of UMI shoots and Tim's always good for the camera. It's always weird when you get a band, when you got someone like Tex who's into it and enthusiastic, but then you got 4 blokes and you can see in their heads after 20 minutes going, we finished yet? You must have got enough by now. You got to finish by now. But yeah, that's then you have to keep them happy at the same time. But yeah, Tex is a great subject matter.
You once rocked up unannounced, unbeknownst to you, to Nick Cave's place.
I did indeed, yes.
In London?
Yes, that was a strange photo shoot. So Nick Cave was about to tour Australia and Mute Records in London knew I was in London and said, oh, can you do a photo shoot next Wednesday? I said, yeah. And then Nick Cave, I went, oh, yeah, great, no problem. They said, oh, you've only got an hour or an hour and a half, 11 o'clock. He had a flat in Kensington. So I got there an hour early and I recce'd the roundabout Kensington and I found a cafe, went into the cafe and I said, look, if I'm in at 11 o'clock, it's not busy, could we have the back cafe? Because I said, it's Nick Cave. The guy said, it was really cool. He said, yeah, great. I'd sourced an alleyway where the light bounced up. I thought, that's really good. And then, come 11 o'clock, I better go. And I rang the doorbell and I could hear someone coming down the stairs and open the door. And there's Nick in his gym jams.
What were his gym jams? What kind of gym jams did he wear?
They were traditional English gym jams.
Flannel?
They were flannel. They were exactly flannel. I want to say they were green, but we're talking 92. I can't remember. But he's there and he opened the door and there was sort of an awkward silence. I went, oh, Tony Mott, photography. He said, yeah, I know who you are. I went, photo session? He went, what photo session? I went, 11 o'clock, I'm supposed to do a photo session with you. And he went, no idea about that. And I went, so there was, again, a little bit of awkward silence. He goes, I'm not leaving the flat. I went, oh, okay.
And you've just arranged this cafe and this great alley.
Everything. So I go up and it was up these stairs and then it was a simple flat, but it had, as England, because it's always bad weather, beautiful diffused light coming through the window. And he didn't change out his Jim Jam bottoms, but he put a shirt on for me. Oh. And I literally shot him just at the window with available light. And it's a great example of you don't panic in those situations. And the reality is Nick Cave is the star. The location is not. Uh-huh. So as long as you get a bit of decent light from some source, you're still going to get it. So I never panic in those situations. In fact, in hindsight, I wouldn't have got better shots had I gone to where I'd picked. This was great. The only bad thing about the whole shoot, I remember, was he just perpetually smoked. He was just smoking the whole time, which looked good in a couple of shots. And I didn't realise at that point that in Europe, they won't publish photographs with people smoking.
Is that right?
Which I always found not alarming, but I'm not a smoker. But moralistically, if it's not illegal, why can't you have it in a photograph? But most magazines, because of the youth market, I suppose quite rightly. So anyway, but apart from the smoking, I did get some nice puff shots where I got the smoke to on me. But I was in there for max. He made me a cup of tea, and I think we had a bit of a yak, and I was in there for 35 minutes. I did about 6 rolls of film, and I got a lot of mileage out of it. Anyway, again, in the days of film, not digital. So I went to wherever I was staying. I processed them. And about a week later, I went into Mute Records with the results. and gave him the contact sheets. And the girl was very, she goes, oh, these are great. All right, we want to pick the, I said, and she goes, oh, it's a really good shoot. I said, well, it's a good shoot. It was a bit weird because when I got there, he didn't seem to know anything about the photo shoot. And she goes, yeah, we never told him about it. I went, what do you mean you never told him about it? She goes, oh, he just refuses to do photo shoots for us. And we just thought, well, you sort of know him. I went, I don't really know him. I met him, but I don't know him. So they used me.
They used you.
They totally used me. And it worked. From their point of view, it worked. From my point of view, I felt quite bad because I thought, oh, it's fucked that they've used me. Years and years later, maybe 4 or 5 years later, I found myself on a tour bus on the big day out, sat next to Nick Cave. And I sort of mumbled some sort of apology. And he didn't give a shit, and he didn't care. Don't think he even remembered the photo shoot. It was complete. But I just felt bad that I'd been used. But I've done Nick Cave several times. I think Nick Cave is the person that I get asked most about is, what's he like? And I said, well, I've been in the room with him half a dozen times. I wouldn't have a clue. I don't know him. I've just done photos. If he walked in the room, I would imagine he'd say, oh, that's that photographer that looks a bit like Ronnie Wood. Yeah, he's done some photos every now and
again. You do look like Ronnie Wood.
There's my Ronnie Wood imitation. There you go. How's that?
I like it.
So I think but I don't know him. I've had a couple of conversations. I had a conversation with him. Paul Goldman,
video director,
who's
movie director.
My best friend knows Nick really well, and we once had a discussion about Goldie, and apart from that. And I did have a discussion with him about, and when I say a discussion, I just mentioned, I went, you and Kylie Minogue, didn't see that coming.
Let's talk about that, because that photo went right around the world. It was Nick Cave and Kylie photographed at the big day out when she appeared on stage to sing Where the Wild Roses Grow.
I don't think you probably know this story, because there's quite a story with that photo shoot.
Let's talk about it, Tony.
So first of all, I heard that I knew he was doing the murder ballads, and he did it, and I knew about PJ Harvey, and I remember someone saying to me, "Oh, the first single is going to be Kylie Minogue," and I sort of laughed and went, "That's not going to happen." I could never see Kylie Minogue and Nick Cave. It seemed like a magnet, wing, but it worked, and it worked for both of them for completely different reasons. Anyway, then the clock goes forward years later, and Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds do the big day out. And Kylie's invited to come on stage to do the one song every night, and so she toured with us the whole thing. So what happened to me was, Porno for Pie was on the bill, and when we came to Sydney, I set up a studio, and I had to do a shoot with Porno for Pie for a cover of Spin magazine in America, and I was quite thrilled with it. And I'd already met Perry Farrell. I'm going to keep going on tangents here, because I can tell you a very first time I met Perry Farrell.
Yeah,
I was in a studio for the big day out, and he said to me, "Oh, is there any trust between us?" And I said, "Yeah, there's trust." And he went, "You need to close your eyes and trust me." And I closed my eyes. After about 10 seconds, I opened up, and he went, "No trust. Where's the bloody trust? I know we're going to trust you." I said, "Well, I don't know what's going on." So I closed my eyes again, and after about 10 seconds, he got hold of my balls and gave them the biggest squeeze, to which, and he goes, "Now there's trust between us." And ever since then...
Your balls were held by Perry Farrell.
Yeah, and you know how you were asking about how you get on with people? Apparently that's one of the techniques. So Perry and I got on quite well after that. So I'm doing this shoot, and I don't know why it was important to me, but I loved Perry Farrell. He's got this amazing face, and I did this great shoot, and I've set up a studio backstage. And then I knew Howard Freeman, who was Nick Cave's tour manager, and I got invited. I've done the shoot. Nick Cave watched the shoot, and he loved what I'd done with Perry. It's just a simple portrait. But for whatever reason, I got invited to Nick Cave's dressing room, which was almost next to the studio. And it'd be fair to say I probably participated in too much Sauvignon Blanc. Mm-hmm. And about 2 hours later, I came out of their dressing room, and all my camera gear had been nicked.
What?
The studio had just disappeared. And I thought, where the fuck's it? I remember for about an hour just not believing that they'd been nicked, because I just thought, where the hell's... Someone's tidied up or whatever. Long story short, it had been nicked. What's the really weird story about this is I got an amazing amount of sympathy from people, and Kathy McCabe, the Telegraph journalist, printed it in the paper. This story's just going to go on, because it just keeps going on. In the meantime, some girl rang me up and said, I don't know what to do, but I know who's nicked your cameras, and I know where they are.
Oh, my goodness.
And she goes, but I don't want to dob the police in. She gave me his number. And so I rang this kid up. He was in the western suburbs of Sydney. And I rang him up and I said, look, my name's Tony Mott. I'm a photographer. I know, and you know that I know that you've got my gear. There's two ways of going this. I've got a police report and a name and number, or I can just come to your house and you give me the gear. And he was quite, he admitted it almost immediately. And he said, yeah, I can't have my mum and dad knowing. So I thought, that's fine. Anyway, when I turned up at this place, idiot me went out there on my own. I'm not a big guy. And this massive monster of a guy came out of the house. I thought, oh my God. But he brought all my gear out. And the only thing he was concerned about was his mum and dad not him out. That's all you can remember. And his mum was at the door, so it must have looked really peculiar. And I said, look, I remember giving him a speech about you should never pinch off a human being, yada, yada, yada. But he was genuinely, the massive guy, shaking like a leaf. I got all my gear, and I know now what a primal scream is. And all the film was still in the camera.
Oh my
Perry
goodness,
Farrell
you
was
are
in the
so
camera.
lucky.
So it was that, and I remember, again, another tangent. I now go back a couple of weeks, because before I got my cameras back, everybody in the Big Day Out knew that I'd had my cameras. Luckily, 2 of my cameras were somewhere else, so I had 1 camera spare. And I went to Melbourne, which was the next leg of the Big Day Out, and everyone knew it. And Howard Freeman had said, oh, Nick Friels has heard about it. Is there anything? And he said, do you want to do a Nick? And this is at the height of Nick and Carly, and they've done no photo session together. And he said, you can do a photo session with Nick and Carly. And I went, oh, that'd be great. Paul Goldman was filming it for a documentary, and I set up a studio, and I did this great shoot with Nick and Carly, and they played up to the camera. They were really hamming it up, and they were flirting the whole bit. They couldn't have been kinder. You got to remember also at this point, Terry Blamey is the manager of Carly.
Yes.
And I'm not going to call him a control freak, but he never allowed Carly to do a photo shoot where the photos just go out. And Kylie and Nick literally turned to me and said, you do what the hell you like with them. And I'd made good money on syndicating them or wherever. And I did say to them, do you want to have a look at them first? Which one? And they went, no. Nick was really kind and just said, no, you've done heaps. And I trust you. And I did get, it turned out, I think I only shot them for 20 minutes and just behind their dressing room with a bit of canvas and the whole bit. And it was just such one of the things that all worked out. And about 2 days later, I got all my cameras back. So it was like this massive
double
bonus.
Happy ending.
To which Viv Lees from the Big Day Out said to me, so how are you going to top that next year?
You've been talking about stars that are quite willing to be photographed. But in the case of Bob Dylan, that was a little bit difficult, wasn't it?
Yeah, I scored the Bob Dylan tour. It was called Hard to Handle. And Gillian...
And it really was hard to handle.
I got a feeling Gillian Armstrong titled it Hard to Handle. She made the film of it, and she probably had more problems than me. The lighting was abysmal, and she kept saying, I can't shoot it with this, I can't shoot that, but the lights stayed they were. The guy who was managing him, and Elliot was the manager, Bob Dylan's manager, said he hates having his photograph taken. You've got to be discreet the whole time. The first time was at Brett Whiteley's studio in Sydney. He did a press conference, and I was in before the press conference, and he's literally from me to you away from me. It's like that, and I'm there. And it looks good. I just said, it'd be good to get one with eye contact down the camera. So I've said that, and he goes... About 10
would
seconds.
Not look at you.
Would not look at me under any circumstances. And he's been introduced to me, and he didn't say I don't want to. There's just silence. Anyway, that was the start of it. And then I did all the live shots. And then I did about 8 shows, and about 4 shows in, the manager said, oh, Bob wants to talk to you tonight. And I knew my photos weren't that great. And the same as Gillian Armstrong, the lighting was so difficult. And you got to remember, this is the days of film. I was pushing the film to an amazing ASA to try and get anything. So as I'm coming to meet the great man, in my head, I'm thinking, I'm going to have to say all the lights. And I'm thinking, not excuses, because I didn't feel guilty. It really was difficult to shoot. And I walked into the dressing room. There was only him and me there. And he starts mumbling to me about middle bit. And I keep going on about, the lights here, if we could have a bit more light. The middle bit, and it's all a bit muddy. Anyway, eventually I was dismissed. And I went out, and the manager said, do you see? I said, he kept going on about the middle bit. To be honest, I have no idea. He goes, he probably just thought you were the sound guy. I was like, what? What's going on? Anyway, 2 days later, I got overconfident, because what happened was I'd shoot long distance, and as the crowd, when they did Knocking on Heaven's Door, the crowd used to surge to the front, and I used to surge with them, so I got a better angle, and I'd be amongst the crowd. And this one night, I'm in amongst the crowd, I thought, I'm going to get stuff here, and there's Tom Petty in the background. They were desperate for me to get Tom Petty and Stevie Nicks. They were both... Stevie Nicks was Tom Petty's squeeze at the time, so she was doing background vocals illegally. The Australian Musicians Union didn't want her on stage because she wasn't supposed to be... She wasn't being,
right?
So that was another little kerfuffle was going on.
Wow.
Tom Petty was in the band. So I'm getting the shots, and then he just starts the first bars of a song when he sees me. In the mid-song, the band's still playing, but he stopped, and he's coming and he goes, fuck off. Straight down the camera. And I'm there. And what was really weird was my natural reaction, because I often get hassled by security or whatever, is to get your laminate and go, ooh, access all areas. But I thought, oh shit, it's Bob Dylan. That's not gonna have much of a. So I left. I got out feeling, and this is in front of 12,000 people. And as I'm marching out, you can see everyone going, whoa, whoa, get out. I go backstage and find the manager, and I said, I've been thrown out. And he went, who the hell threw you out? I went, that's Bob Dylan. He went, oh, God, he's seen you. I said, yeah, he told me to go forth and multiply. And I have. But he said, but it didn't bother Elliot. He just said, oh, well, tomorrow night we'll have another guy. I went, well, he's told me to go away. He obviously doesn't want me there. He goes, don't worry about it. It'll be fine tomorrow. You won't remember anything. And I did shoot 2 more nights and without incident. And I got eye contact with him one more time. And of course, I'm waiting for and there was no reaction whatsoever. So it was quite peculiar. I never quite worked out whether he was playing games, whatever. Bob Dylan still remains a mystery to me. Susie Pullen, who's an Australian girl, who's been his PA for maybe 30 years now, and is a sort of a friend, she got me tickets, and I sat side stage, not photographing him, at the State Theatre. And it was towards the end of the gig, and Don Walker, who I totally respect and love her, and I'm just about to say to him, is this the worst thing you've experienced? When he turns to me and say, is this the greatest gig you've ever been to? I was like, what? You're kidding me. And that's the great thing about music. It's all subjective. And I don't get Bob Dylan, but people do. And I'm emphasise huge respect. Unbelievable songwriter. There's no two ways. Up there with the Beatles, the whole thing. But his live concerts, I've never got it whatsoever. And I've done maybe 20 shows, and I just think dreadful. But
does it make it harder as a photographer trying to capture something if you don't like the music, or it doesn't worry you? You're just looking for those images, those shapes.
It's a bit of a yin and yang. I have caught myself rocking to a band, and you're not supposed to be rocking with a band. You're supposed to, but you're also inspired by the music when it's really great music, and also I don't like Metallica, as in Metallica's not my cup of tea, but my God, I get their power. So when I'm photographing them, I'm desperate to capture what that is. All the antics that's going on there. So that's to a certain extent that's an advantage, because I'm not concentrating on the music in any shape or form. Often I come out of a gig and someone will say, "Oh, how great was Gene Genie?" I went, "Did he do Gene Genie?" So you sometimes miss things from that point of view. But the advantage of not liking them, or not liking them, but not that interested, is you're concentrating on pure art of photography. Whereas there's other times I have caught myself in the pit with the Rolling Stones and I'm just going off. I think, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be taking photographs. I must concentrate for a minute. So it's all different, and you can never predict it. I did Sonic Youth and I did an EP cover with them, and I was very thrilled. And I was interacting with Kim Gordon about how we were laying it all out. And it was such a thrill. And within a week, I was on the road with Michael Bolton. And it's like that's
the yin and the yang.
That's a contrast. And I remember Michael Bolton. Obviously, someone said to him, he's just finished Sonic Youth, and we're having a dinner thing, and not me and Michael Bolton, but lots of people. And he came up and he said, "Oh, how's the photos going?" He's going, "Not as good as touring with Sonic Youth." And I thought that was very good of him. That he's like, and of course I can't answer because I was just about to go, it's all rock and roll, except it's not. So sometimes, I can honestly say there's only one time where I've probably been rude and I didn't like it. And I did Matchbox 20.
Right.
And I wasn't very impressed with them, as in they're not my cup of tea, which is fine. But I shot them. And Rob Thomas, the singer, someone had told him I'd toured with Queen. And he's obviously a massive Freddie Mercury. I had a couple of beers and we're backstage and he was going on about Freddie Mercury. And halfway through the conversation, I started to think, is he comparing himself to Freddie Mercury? And he's a huge fan. And I remember just saying to him, the great thing about Queen is, I said, Freddie Mercury worked the audience, and Queen used to come on at that level, and they had platforms, and they build. And this was Freddie, and he knew how to split an audience. He used to do vaudeville tricks. He'd get the left side of the turn to concentrate on the right. And in the middle of every gig, after about 5 songs in, Freddie Mercury used to point into the audience, go, "Jimmy, good to see you, Jimmy." And I go, "Fuck, he's met on it." And after he'd done it 8 nights, I went, it's just a trick. Because everyone's going, "Oh my, he knows one of us." Well. But Freddie Mercury studied vaudeville, and he had lots of tricks. And at soundcheck, he used to get the roadies on their open airs to put flags, the furthest point. And he said, "That's who we entertain. These are easy." Right. So entertain that. And all the video people were told
performing
to concentrate.
To the back of the room.
That guy on the flag, the furthest point, entertain that. These are a doddle. But he used to split lots of it. Anyway, I was saying this to Rob Thomas. I was a bit drunk. possibly, and I was a bit rude, and I just said to him, so Queen, come on like that. And I said, by the time they get to the encore, they've left everyone in euphoria, and that's why they're one of the great bands. And he said, yeah, Matchbox. I said, Matchbox come on this level. Good night.
You actually said that to Rob
Thomas. I said that
Thomas.
to him, and he looked at me, and I said, you don't pace your concerts. It comes at this level. I mean, he said, yeah, you've seen some bad nights. We can be better than that. Anyway, 2 nights later, he asked me again. I didn't have the heart to say anything. I just went, yeah, you were much. But they weren't. They just do that. They've got a level, and that's it.
I'm still excuse me. I'm just still getting over the fact that you photographed Queen. Was this in London or was this in Australia?
No, I've done both. I did Queen. Queen were great. They had John Reed, the manager, was fantastic. He let me shoot the whole show at the Sydney Entertainment Centre, and then, as a consequence of that, somehow I got the gig. Really, in my early days, they played Nebworth, and they did 2 nights at 240,000 people. So it's like 500,000 people. And he said, and the girl from me and I said, John's got your photo patch, you can come. I was very green, and I got to Queen. It was fantastic. The support was status quo and big country. Anyway, I've been there for about 3 or 4 hours, and it's 240,000 people. It's like fucking massive. And all of a sudden, I'm backstage, and they go, Tony Mott, photographer, can you come to the publicity tent? I thought, they've worked out I shouldn't be here. I thought, well, I've had a good day. I'm getting thrown out. And I go to the publicity tent, and the girl says, the helicopter pilot's getting a bit pissed off. You haven't been up yet. I went, no, I haven't. No. And he
goes, haven't been up in the helicopter.
And he's going, well, he's not. He's got to go and pick up Bandit. So okay, I went to the helicopter pilot there, and he was there. And he goes, you're the Aussie guy. And of course, the accent really baffles him. You're the Aussie guy. Yeah, that's me. He goes, I'm glad you're here. God, I've had some wankers who don't know how to shoot at 125th of a second or higher. I went, yeah, what wankers? Because you get camera shake in a helicopter. And thank God he said that to me, because I wouldn't have known. And then he put me up in the helicopter, and I'm swooping over the Queen crowd. And when you're in a helicopter above 240, you go, my God, that's massive. And it was. And then Queen came on and blew everyone away. What I didn't know at the time was that was Freddie Mercury's last ever concert. He never ever played again. And I have met Brian May since backstage at a Mott the Hoople gig in London. And I did ask him whether they knew at the time. And he said, we knew he was ill, but we didn't know that was the last gig. But that was their last ever gig. It wasn't advertised at any show. Anyway, they played to 2 nights, 240,000 people, and then they had a party afterwards. And I got invited to the party. And I'm about to tell you a quite crazy story. And the bad thing about this entire story is I didn't know anybody, not a single person. And I needed to know one person. So first of all, they said, there's no way you can bring cameras. So the Kensington High Gardens, and you go up in this lift. And when you got on the lift, there was 2 naked models, one guy, one girl, giving you
completely naked,
not a stiletto heels, and the guys had little tassels that were sort of hanging off their nipples. Well, I never did work out whatever that was, but they were serving champagne. I could have just gone up and down the lift all night. I was happy as long as just drinking this champagne. Really nice champagne. Got into this sort of ballroom, and when you went to the bar, I think I was drinking Sauvignon Blanc in those days, and they gave me a 1950s bottle of French Sauvignon Blanc with a glass. And the girl next to me was having vodka and tomato juice, bottle of Stolly, picture of tomato juice.
Oh my
there was no just little drinks, the whole bit. As I was walking around the room, oh my God, it's Annie Lennox from Eurythmics, there's Eric Clapton. Oh my God, there's the girl who reads the news, the soap stars. It's just a room full. As it got more and more debauched, it's the first time I've seen 2 women basically having sex in public.
No
and they were
way.
in a cubicle over there. And I have to say, I felt quite pervy because I couldn't keep my eyes off them at the same time. I don't think I'm supposed to be seeing this. There's 2 women over there. There's men snogging men all over the place. Freddie Mercury was on the dance floor. Now, there's a girl called Sam Fox. And she was
page 3 model.
Page 3.
Touch Me, I Want Your Body, famous hit, 1985.
God, that's very good, because I wouldn't remember that. Her breasts are now out, and Freddie's playing with them while he's dancing on her. It's going off, and it's going off the whole bit. But then as you walked up the ballroom, so now you've just got Roman orgy, celebrities going off, alcohol, the whole bit. You walked up these steps to this steps, and in the next room were all Queen's family, with their kids, their grannies and their nannies, and they're having an afternoon English tea party.
Oh my
and
God.
With Freddie's mum going, oh, wasn't Freddie wonderful on stage? And so as you stood in this doorway, over there, complete debauchery, English afternoon tea party. And you're just saying, and I needed one person to say, can you believe what's going on here? And I do remember this unbelievably attractive girl came up to me and said, who are you? And I said, I'm an Australian photographer. And she just walked off.
Oh.
I needed to be a wanker. Got it completely wrong. But anyway, it went on and on and on. And as I said, the main fault for me was I needed a friend there to just go, can you just believe what we're witnessing here? When all of a sudden, the canopies, or what I thought were canopies, started coming out, and there was all these dwarfs wandering around with plates. And as they got closer, I realised they had plates of cocaine on their head. And there was no going to the toilets. People were just going down and sniffing the whole bit.
Oh, my God.
I should emphasise, I'm not a drug taker. I'm quite happy to drink buckets of wine. But that was the night, and it was just completely surreal. Anyway, went back to the hotel later night. 2 days later, it was in the paper that it was reported that Freddie Mercury spent £180,000 on his after-show party. And I went, yeah, I think I saw 180,000 worth of pounds. I think that'd be about right.
Oh,
it was like,
goodness.
and that was it. Anyway, that was my first ever big rock and roll party. And I thought, my God, welcome to rock and roll. I've not been to one ever since that got even remotely close to Queen's after-show party. Q magazine about 5 years ago did the greatest rock and roll parties, and it made the top 10. And I thought,
you were there.
I made one of the top 10s, and that's Queen's after party. But you've got to remember that £180,000 he spent. They did 2 nights, 240,000 people at 30 quid a ticket. So they just their door is over 10 million. So they made a lot of money very quickly, and they never ever played again.
It's interesting you introduced yourself as an Australian photographer. Do you think of yourself as Australian?
Totally, yeah, totally. I'm an Australian with a very strange Redfern accent.
Yes, very strange.
Yeah, I do. Whenever I go home to England, so I call England home because it's my birthplace. Everyone in the local pub calls me the Australian guy. So yes, no, I class myself as Australian.
You mentioned the band Mott the Hoople. It's the band by which you take your surname, Mott, from Mott the Hoople. You are Anthony Moulds by birth. Yeah, sure. Although Anthony Moulds is not so rock and roll, is it?
No, it's not so rock and roll.
Were your parents upset that you
took
the name Mott?
Yeah, well, it was never on my passport. I'm still Moulds on my passport, but my father was like, oh, you should be proud of your surname, lad. You should be proud of it. So the first photo I ever sold was Chrissy Ample at Divinyls in a street press on the street, and the girl who was laying it out. So it's the first photo published, so it's a huge thrill, massive thrill. And she said, oh, photo credit. And I said Anthony Moulds, and she just laughed at me. And I went, well, what are you looking? She goes, you can't call yourself Anthony Moulds if you're going to be a photographer. And I went, well, that's my name. She goes, well, who's your favourite band? Oh, well, first of all, there was names. I couldn't think of anything. And she said, well, who's your favourite band? I said, Mott the Hoople. She goes, well, there you go. Tony Hoople, Tony Mott.
Lucky it wasn't Thin Lizzy or Def Leppard.
That's true. There's quite a few that wouldn't have worked. Mott the Hoople, yeah, they're my favourite all-time band still. Everyone needs a Mott the Hoople, and there's lots of reasons why. And I just related to them and just love them to death.
I was very interested. As I said, I've known you a very long time, Tony, but I never knew that you were adopted by birth.
I was adopted by birth, yes.
And you sought out your birth mother recently.
I found her in 45 minutes on the net, very quickly. And long story short, I tracked her down, and I have since met her. I went to the pub with just her. She knew I was a photographer, and I thought, she's an 80-year-old woman. She doesn't need to look at pictures of Mick Jagger and David Bowie. So I took my travel photos, and she's looking through the travel photos. She got to this one photo. She goes, oh, is that Timbuktu? I said, yeah, it is. And she went, oh, I found it very dusty there. I went, you've been to Timbuktu? And she went, yeah. I since learned that I've been to just over 100 countries. She'd been to 80. And my birth father and my full-blood brother never left the village. So whatever genes I inherited some sort of travel bug.
What other Australian bands have you been most impressed by over the years?
Oh God, that's as big a list as overseas bands.
I know you're a big Amyl and the Sniffers fan, for example.
Absolutely. I think they were when I went. In fact, it was you that recommended to me to go and see them, and I did make an effort and go and see them, and they blew me away. I shot them 3 times, and what was great, I shot them at the Wollongong University, and their show at the Enamoured in Sydney was almost like a different band. They play completely differently. Both great gigs, really great gigs. Very best Australian band I've seen for a long time from a live performance point of view. They were fantastic. They blew me away. But over the years, I think there's been a few Australian bands that have not got the cue. You Am I would be a great example of a band that should have happened overseas. I think Tim, but my take on Tim was Keith and he needed a Mick. I always thought there was a part missing.
Sure.
But I think Tim's, I mean, there's not a debate about Tim being a genuine rock and roll star. His musical knowledge alone is worthy. But I always thought, how the hell are they not a bigger band overseas? Dirty 3, would be another example of a band that should be way more. Whenever I'm overseas and Dirty Three names, and people go, "Who's the Dirty Three?" and then I just show them either footage or play it, and they go, "Wow!" and I just think, how come that hasn't happened? Obviously, Warren meeting Nick is also an incredible. That's fantastic that's happened, and a great thing for both of them. But the amount of Australian bands, my favourite all-time Australian band is Temper Temper. Who no one's ever heard of.
Yeah. Around in the 90s?
Around in the 90s.
Yeah.
And they were, when Chrissy Amphlett and the Divinyls were the Monday, they were the Tuesday.
Right.
And I genuinely believe he wrote amazingly great pop songs. And they did got offered deals. Rob O'Connell was the lead singer. And I class Rob as a good friend. He's difficult. And he never got... He was very... he just didn't get on with record company. And so it never happened. That golden era of the 70s, 80s and 90s, Australia produced so many bands, so many.
You photographed most of them.
Most of them, and the list goes on. And a lot of those bands came and went really quickly, and should have had a longer life. In the not in the modern era, but in the later era, in the noughties, I believe the Drones should have been massive. I thought the Drones, not only their material, but just their performance and everything, had they been, they're probably not guilty. Wrong time, wrong place.
Yeah.
Had they been in another era, they would have definitely...
Or maybe even another country.
Or another... Well, people like AC/DC and Nick Cave's, I think their greatest thing they ever did was fuck off. They'd already reached the ceiling of whatever the ceiling was within the country. So relocating worked. And I mean, people forget that Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds squatted in London for a substantial amount of time, and that can't have been funny. No. But they stuck with it, and they got to wherever they've got to now. And AC/DC in the same ballpark. They didn't have a great time when they first went overseas, but they stuck at it. And whatever that game plan was, it worked. And because unfortunately, we are a small pond in a massive ocean, and it's quite not easy. But you can get to the edge of the pond, but getting out of it and bigger is, I mean, bands like the Triffids. Way more successful in Europe than they were here. True. But that was definitely a good move on all those parts. I look at Cold Chisel and the Angels from the 70s and early 80s, of bands that had they happened 10 years earlier, they'd be with Deep Purple and Free and all those bands. But by the time, I mean, Cold Chisel, I remember seeing Cold Chisel at the Marquee in London and thinking how great they were, but it was in the middle of punk.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, the English are going, we've been there, done that. But the reality is the Cold Chisel were unbelievably good at what they did. And Cold Chisel, to me, are the epitome of what a band is. It's not one person. There's so many cogs.
The sum of their parts.
There's so many cogs.
Yeah.
And you take a couple of cogs out and it doesn't work. The biggest crime was Mantissa, who were killing time. And then when the guitarist left, he wasn't the good-looking one, but there was a talent there, and you took a cog out, and all of a sudden the machine wasn't working so well. And that's what's the beauty of music, particularly with bands. I mean, without being rude to Mick Jagger, his solo albums, my cat could have made them. But he's part of the greatest rock and roll band in the world, but it's because he's part of the whole thing. And no one can work out that chemistry. It's just the greatest mystery of why chemistry of a band, where there's 5 people or whatever it is, and they all work. I mean, I don't think the Beatles would have been great, but you take Ringo out, which theoretically is replaceable, they would have been great, but they were not quite the perfect band they were.
You did get to shoot Paul McCartney.
I toured with Paul McCartney in 95, which was, I suppose obviously touring with the Stones is huge, but touring with a goddamn Beatle is, you have to pinch yourself going, it's a fucking Beatle, it's a goddamn Beatle. I was told at the beginning, well, the first part of the story was I got a phone call saying, Paul McCartney's looking for a tour photographer, but he doesn't hire anybody that he hasn't met. And the girl said, we're going to fly you you got to bring your portfolio, fly you to Melbourne. He's rehearsing, and we'll put you up and you'll meet Paul. And then I flew to Melbourne and I got to the hotel lobby, and this girl rang and she goes, when you get to reception, ask for Mary McCartney. And this is the girl I've been negotiating with for a couple of weeks. And I went, that wouldn't be a coincidence, would it? And she went, no, it's the daughter. And
daughter?
Yeah, the Mary was working. She called herself a publicist, but she wasn't. But she was working on the tour. And I met her first, and then I met Linda and Paul, and I got on with them, and I got the gig.
You were told not to mention the Beatles, weren't you?
I was told very early on not to mention the Beatles, and the reality is you can't be in company with Paul McCartney for more than 15 minutes until he mentions the Beatles. And he mentioned them on the several days. When we got to Sydney, he got me a wad of photos of the Beatles in Sydney, and he wanted to reproduce where they were. Wow. First of all, I did the research of where the bloody hell these photos were taken, and lots of those places didn't exist. The Chevron, which is where they stayed and waved at people, the building was there, but it didn't look even remotely like it did. There was a couple of things that I couldn't find, but we did Lady Macquarie's Chair with the Opera House and the bridge in the background.
How wonderful.
And we went down there and we worked out that you get 15 minutes before he gets mobbed. And he did get mobbed everywhere we went. And he's very, because I spent that small period of time with him, he's very, very patient. He gives time, but he must get sick of it now.
You must have a lot of secrets from your many decades of being in.
There's a few secrets.
Very interesting places with interesting people.
Very interesting. Yeah.
What's your philosophy on life? You never seem pissed off, annoyed, angry. I've never seen
I'm perpetually pissed off and annoyed. This is a facade. Do you know, I reckon, strangely we were talking earlier because I mentioned Calcutta. I went to Calcutta in 1976 and I saw the most abject poverty I'd ever seen. I saw dead bodies on the street. This is 1976. It cannot not have effect on you. But the effect that most had on me was those people, the people around in Calcutta, were some of the most wonderful people, open, friendly, inviting, the whole bit. Just after that, I went to Bangladesh, which is not an unsimilar situation with the poverty. And I remember this woman, because I was walking through a marketplace, and, you know, there was no, this is 1970s, no backpackers, so they just don't see tourists. And she came over, she spoke pidgin English, and I spoke enough Bengali to just communicate. And she invited me to a family home, and she lived in a slum with a little hut, and they cooked me rice, and they're feeding me. And I remember just thinking how humble and how great. And her dream was to go to England. And I was just thinking, she's not going to get the reception I'm getting here, this beautiful. And I just remember thinking, whatever problems or shit hits the fan in Sydney, compared to how these people and their spirit and just their general demeanour and thingy. And I always think that made a huge difference to me, because after that, life became anything that's happening in Sydney where you can't pay your rent or something's happening. It's like, nah, I'm very, very, very privileged. And the fact that I emigrated to Australia, and you know, we always talk about the lucky country and stuff. In many ways, it really is. Apart from being the lucky country, it is a fantastic country. Even though Australia's got problems and stuff, it's a fantastic country, and I live in it, and I feel very lucky. So that's a philosophy in so much as where I live, I mean, the world's fucked, and what's going on at the moment is unbelievably bad. And I live in a country where it's not like that. I don't know whether that's my philosophy of life, but that has made, I always look back at that and think, you know, I've seen that and go, you know, I live somewhere is very privileged.
Tony Mott, it's been absolutely wonderful getting to know you here at the Australian Music Vault today.
I just presumed this was a sound check. Was that it?
Thank you for your time.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Love you.
Thank you, Jane. Cheers.